All right, a lot of questions about the big, beautiful bill. What do we need to know about it, and how is it going to affect our clients? Well, the first thing I want to point out is that this is only passed through the House of Representatives so far. It's not yet the law. It still has to get through the Senate, and I can guarantee you it's not going to get through the Senate without some pretty major changes. Well, I don't know about major changes, but there will be changes. It's not going to get passed and sent to Trump to sign as it stands now. There are going to be things that get changed in the Senate. We'll talk about some of those in a minute. Another thing to understand is that this is nothing really major, no huge shocks to the system with the proposal for the new tax code here. This is basically just extending the tax code that was put in place back in 2018. So in 2017 is when they passed the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act. This was in year one of Trump's first term. They passed this new tax code. Rates were lowered for everybody across the board, and they're basically just extending that with a few changes. Most of our clients, this is good news for them. Almost all of our clients, probably 95% of our clients, got a tax cut back in 2018 when the current tax code went into effect. Some of our higher earning clients, like if you're making more than $400,000 or $500,000 a year, this amounted to a tax increase for some of those folks. But they're few and far between. This was a tax cut for most people. So you would assume that for most people, extending the current tax code is good news instead of rates reverting to what they were before 2018. The other thing is not just rates being lower, but the standard deduction remains high in the new tax code. So I think now it's like 85% of taxpayers are just taking the standard deduction, not even itemizing their deductions on their taxes. So you don't have to chase down your charitable giving receipts. You don't have to add up all of your state and local taxes. You just take the standard deduction. And because most people are doing that, it's simpler to file their taxes. The standard deduction is a larger amount than what a lot of people would have been itemizing in the past anyway. So that also essentially amounts to a tax cut for a lot of people. Another thing to note is the estate tax stays at a very high threshold before you pay any federal estate tax. It's now like $15 million per person. I think $30 million for a couple. And this doesn't apply to your IRAs. If you leave IRA money to the kids and grandkids, they're still going to be taxed on that. But if you had a massive estate with lots of real estate or anything like that, that's not going to be taxed until you get past those thresholds, which affects almost none of our clients that would be over that threshold. So that's something to note. There is a slight increase to the child tax credit with this new bill. It's like $2,000 per child now. It's going to go up to $2,500 per kid. With the same income phase outs, like $400,000 in income is where you start to lose the child tax credits. There's also a baby bonus. Essentially, you have a kid, you get $1,000 tax credit. So there are little things like that. I would not encourage you to have a kid just because of the child tax credit or that baby bonus. Costs a lot more than that to have a kid. But, it's helpful at a time where our fertility rates as a country are low. So that's interesting. So the thing that's getting the most conversation in this new tax bill is not the elimination of the SALT cap, but raising the SALT cap to a point where they almost might as well eliminate it. So the SALT cap, a quick explainer if you're not familiar, before the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act in 2018, there was no limit on how much state and local tax you could deduct from your federal taxes. So if you paid $15,000 a year in state taxes and then you had another $9,000 in property taxes, you could deduct all of that from your federal taxes. With the current tax code that's in place, that's limited to $10,000. So think about who this affects the most. It affects people who have a really high income, have a really expensive house, and their property taxes are high, or almost anybody that lives in a high tax state. New York, California, Minnesota, places like this. Because in those high tax blue states, now you have people that can't deduct as much of their state and local taxes. And so now that, for some of them, amounted to a tax increase with the current plan. So now, with this new bill, in order to get it through the House, part of the negotiation was they raised the SALT cap to $40,000. very few people out there are going to have more than $40,000 in state and local taxes to deduct anyway. So that's why I say they might as well have just gotten rid of it altogether. The reason they had to do that is because you have 5 or 6 Republican congressmen from blue states. So that's a very specific type of person, a Republican congressman from a blue state. Why is the SALT cap so important to them? Well, they're in these states where the income taxes are really high, and for their constituency, their voters want to be able to deduct all those taxes. And so they're saying, hey, if we're going to vote for this new bill, we need to have a higher SALT cap. Of course, then you have people in Texas and Tennessee and Florida, states with no income tax, who are saying, well, hold on now. Why should we be subsidizing the fact that your state has income taxes that are so high? And so this has been the whole debate. Personally, I don't understand why they can't just keep the $10,000 limit, but make it per person. So if it's a married couple, now it's a $20,000 cap, while an individual filer would still have a $10,000 cap. That seems fair. Maybe that's where they'll eventually land. I don't know. I don't understand the point of going from $10,000 to $40,000 other than just the politics of it. That's what they had to do to get it passed. Now, this is where it's most interesting in the Senate, because there are no SALT cap senators. Again, think about the political influences that are driving this conversation. Blue state Republican senators are the ones that want to raise the SALT cap. Now, sure, blue state Democrats would also want to raise it, but they're kind of irrelevant because you don't need any Democrats to pass the bill. These Republican congressmen that are saying we're not going to vote unless you raise the SALT cap, they're the ones that have to be negotiated with because the Republicans can't pass the bill without those votes. The majority just isn't big enough. So these guys like Mike Lawler, others from New York, they have a lot of say in this. All right. It's important in the Senate because, like I said, there's no SALT cap senators. Think about all those high tax states: California, New York, Vermont, Massachusetts, Connecticut. All of these high tax states have 0 Republican senators, not a single one. So there's no Republican that's needed to pass it through the Senate. There's no Republicans that care about the SALT cap. They're all from low tax states for the most part. And so there's just no political reason that a Republican senator would care about a higher SALT cap. If anything, they would want it lower because their states don't want to subsidize the high tax states. So it'll be interesting to see where we come out on that in the Senate. That's one thing to keep an eye on. That will affect a lot of our clients because, quite frankly, if you're earning, $150,000 as a married couple, you're probably paying $8,000 or $9,000 in state income tax. Plus, if you have your $5,000 or $6,000 property tax bill. So I have clients who live in Chapel Hill, and in the city school district there, they're paying $9,000 or $10,000 for, it's not a multi-million-dollar house. Their house might be worth less than $1 million, but they still have an almost $10,000 property tax bill. Being able to deduct all of that would be meaningful. So we're keeping an eye on that. The other thing is there is a scale back on how much subsidy you would be able to get on your health insurance premiums. So we have a lot of folks that are in their late 50s, early 60s. They're not quite yet to Medicare age, and they're kind of, for lack of a better term, gaming the system. They're strategically manipulating their income in certain years so that they can keep their income lower, stay under the threshold, get the subsidy for their health insurance premiums. Some of that is going to be a little harder to do. Not necessarily that it'll go away altogether. It's just that you won't get as much subsidy. So I expect some people will have a higher health insurance premium than they would in the current tax code. Now, again, we'll see how that all comes out in the Senate. Those are the main 2 things to watch: healthcare subsidies and SALT cap increase. We'll see what happens. I have no idea how long this will be in the Senate. It might just go there and rot, and then they try again in October or November, and they push something through right at the end of the year. That's kind of what they did in 2017. It was very last minute. Or it could be something that gets worked out here in the next month or 2, and it's a bill that Trump can sign and it goes into effect. That would be great if that's how it goes, because now we would have a few months to plan before we go into 2026, and any moves that clients might need to make here before the end of the year, they could go ahead and do it. We'll see what happens. Stay tuned, but that's what we know so far.
Carolina Wealth Stewards doing business as Rosewood Wealth Management is a registered investment advisor in the state of North Carolina. The material presented is intended to be general information and should not be construed by any consumer as the rendering of personalized investment advice.